This study is done in Korea, which of course is a very advanced biomedical country. But the problem is, so far the report hasn't been published in English, it's just been published in Korean as far as I can find. But we do have reliable news outlets for it, and this all makes perfect scientific sense as well. So I'm convinced this is all true, and when the English version of the Korean document comes out from the Korean government and the Korean Centre for Disease Control, it will say the same thing. So there's been reports about people testing positive again after they've been infected from China, Japan, Italy, as much as 10 weeks later. So pretty frightening stuff here. Can you get this twice? Is this going to be circulating permanently amongst human beings? And is it an illness we're going to get with the risks of death every 6 months? The answer appears to be no. Once you've had it, it looks like you're okay, you're immune. Which is what I'd expected all the way through, because this is what happens with most other diseases. Now, recovered patients who tested positive for COVID-19 are not likely reinfected. Now, what this means is that some patients who had COVID-19 and they've recovered, weeks later they're still testing positive. So how come they're still testing positive if they've recovered? Well, the answer is that these tests that we're using to test for the virus, the antigen test, is remarkably sensitive. And it's sensitive for the viral RNA. And viral RNA can live on inside cells in the respiratory tract. Cells that maybe haven't been killed by the virus, but the cells have been able to live despite the presence of the virus, but the virus is still there. So when these cells are shed and coughed up, and viral particles are coughed up, then the RNA, the dead RNA if you like from the virus, can still be coughed up, and that will be recognised by the test. So it looks like what these tests are detecting is dead virus, not living virus. Now we can debate all day if you like about how viruses are living or dead. Not interested in that debate. What I'm interested in is the virus viable? Will it cause disease and will it infect other people? And the answer is no after someone's recovered, as long as they're not having symptoms anymore. So it's good news. So this fear about reinfection turns out largely, according to this Korean study, to be an artifact of our testing limitation and the way we test. So patients are testing positive, yes, after some patients, not many, some patients are testing positive after they've recovered, when they have antibodies. But those patients who test positive do not have active viral disease, and they do not infect other people. And after a few months, probably 3 or 4 months, these people will eventually clear all the dead virus and will start testing antigen negative. So that's what seems to have been happening. So patients who appeared reinfected actually were having false positives. I mean, it wasn't a false positive in the sense that the test was detecting viral RNA, but it was dead viral RNA, not making them sick anymore and not infecting other people. So the Korean Centre for Disease Control conclude that people probably do have long-term immunity. Now, how long this is, we don't know. I still think it will be a year or 2 years, but we simply don't know that yet. We wait to find that out. But so far, it looks like these people are immune, at least over months, which is good news. Now, this is done by an expert panel in the Korean Centre for Disease Control, and they said these people were expressing dead viral fragments which were still triggering the test positive. And of the 10,000 or more people infected and tested in Korea, 290 were testing positive after recovery. Now, not a big number out of 10,000, but it would have been concerning if that was live virus, but it's not. It's just the remnants of the war. They're finding the dead bodies of the virus after the war. After the patient has won the war, they're finding some of the dead bodies of the virus, completely useless, not making the person sick, not infecting other people. Now, having said that, people can still suffer from after effects of this virus, because we know that some of the people that get sickest, it's the body's inflammatory reaction that's happening. rather than the direct pathogenicity, rather than the direct disease-causing effect of the virus. We're not really talking about that. We're talking about this long-term thing. So these 290 people who tested positive, the test was finding dead virus. Not a problem. Now, not caused by reinfection or reactivation. So firstly, the people weren't getting reinfected. It wasn't that they had another viral infection, that they'd been exposed to the virus again, and because they hadn't not developed immunity, they had the virus again. That wasn't happening. They were immune. Good news, they were immune. And the other fear was reactivation of the virus. Now, what happens here is some viruses actually get into the nucleus of the cell and incorporate themselves into the DNA. So, like long-term viruses like HIV do this, or hepatitis B does. Hepatitis B, I think, does this. And you can get a chronic infection, and the virus can be reactivated because the virus has insinuated its way into the very genetics of the cell. And then the virus can be reactivated. Well, that is not happening. That doesn't seem to be happening. So more good news. So once someone's cleared the virus, they cleared it, they're finished with it. So these positive cases were not caused by reinfection or reactivation of the virus that was lying dormant inside the cells. That was not happening. Test detects the ribonucleic acid of the dead virus. Dead. No problem. Not infectious. This is a remarkably encouraging publication from the Korean authorities. PCR test cannot distinguish living or dead viruses, therefore leading to false positives. So these viruses were dead, meaning they could not infect cells, meaning they could not infect other people. Fragments of the virus can be detected for up to 2 months. This is what the Korean experts are saying. Respiratory epithelial cells have a half-life of up to 3 months. That's interesting. So if you look at the lining of the respiratory tract, and you look at all the individual cells there, come back in 3 months, and only half of those cells will have replaced themselves. So that means that cells that were infected with the virus and not killed by the virus could still have viral particles, theoretically, longer than 3 months, theoretically up to 6 months. Although by that time the dose would be very small. But, well, theoretically even longer than that. But what it means is basically, practically for many months, people can be expressing the virus because of the respiratory lining cells, the cells lining the respiratory passages that have been exposed to the virus may be retaining dead viral particles but are no longer actively infected. In other words, it's taking sometimes, in these minority of people, months to clear the virus. In this sample of the 290 that they found were testing positive again. Who were not testing positive, they were false positives. And these patients, when they looked at them, had developed antibodies. These are the immune proteins. So what it means is these patients were antibody positive, meaning they had immunity. And the fact that they were still expressing the antigen was an artifact of the antigen test. The process by which COVID-19 produces a new virus takes place only in host cells and does not infiltrate the nucleus, according to the authorities in Korean Centre for Disease Control. In other words, what happens is, if you think about that's the cell there, and inside the cell there is a nucleus, and you might know the nucleus contains the DNA. So what happens with HIV, for example, is the virus gets into the cell, and then the virus actually codes itself into the DNA, so you can't get rid of it easily. It's in the DNA of the cell. Then the DNA will express the virus, make new virus, leading to chronic infection. So the antiretroviral drugs we give are reducing the viral load, stopping the disease from becoming more severe, but they're not curing the disease. People have to take these antiretrovirals for life. So once someone's infected with HIV, that's it, they've got it for life. We can't cure HIV. We can only suppress the viral particles outside with antiretroviral drugs. And that works very effectively. The patients can live for many decades of good quality life. But what's happening with this virus, or the COVID-19 virus? So there's the cell again. There's the nucleus with the DNA. What's happening is the COVID-19 virus is getting in and it's replicating in the cytoplasm of the cell, not in the nucleus in here. Now very often that will kill the cell, and then these viral particles will come out to reinfect other cells. So they'll shed many viral particles. And then that cell will either die or it can recover. And as we now know, some viral particles can be left in recovered cells and be expressed for months. But what this study is saying is these viruses do not get into the nucleus, they do not get into the DNA, so they do not cause chronic infection as hepatitis and HIV does. So this is good news. So the virus is just hijacking the protein-producing apparatus of the cell in the cytoplasm. It's not getting into the control center of the cell, it's not getting into the nucleus, it's not getting into the DNA of the cell. Therefore, we don't expect reactivation of the virus. So again, very good news. Does not infiltrate the nucleus. So we don't get chronic infection. When the infection's cleared, it's cleared. This means it does not cause chronic infection or recurrence. So excellent. It will not recur. Virus stays outside of the host cell's nucleus before quickly bursting out and infecting the next cell. So that's what we've said there. That it doesn't go in the nucleus, it just works in the cytoplasm, producing many copies of itself, reinfecting other cells. Still dangerous, but it's not causing reinfection. And it's not infecting the DNA, it's not affecting the nucleus of the cell, becoming chronic. So it doesn't become chronic, just means long term. So what we're dealing with here is an acute illness. You get it, it can kill you, but if it doesn't, you'll recover and be immune. It's remarkably good news. We're fortunate, the virus didn't have to be like this. It's fortunate in a way. It's tragic that we've got the pandemic, but it could have been a lot worse if this virus was causing chronic infection and reinfections and reactivations. That would have been bad news. So this news is good. I feel quite relieved just reading you all this material here, actually. It's quite a relief. So unlike hepatitis B or human immunodeficiency virus, which cause chronic infection, this doesn't. So someone can get liver damage years after they contract hepatitis B, for example, because the virus has insinuated itself into the tissues of the liver and into the DNA of the liver. That doesn't happen. Doesn't happen with RNA, with the COVID-19 coronavirus. And this other thing here, the group also say that the virus is currently undergoing very small genetic changes. Also remarkably good news, so the immune system will recognize it. So it's good news all the way through this. It's really very good news. And they say some people might have a drop-off in antibody levels, which are the actual immune proteins. But these immune proteins, these antibodies, are actually made by cells called B lymphocytes. These B lymphocytes actually they manufacture, the B lymphocytes are the factory that manufactures the antibodies, that manufactures the immunoglobulins, these immune proteins that give us the immunity. And it says even if the antibody levels do fall over time, so the amount, so what you have is you have these B cells here, and these are producing huge amounts of antibodies like that, the immune proteins, these Y-shaped things. So it's producing those. Now it says over time, the amount of these might reduce in the blood. But these cells also make another form of cell called a memory lymphocyte. So in the blood and tucked away there in the lymph glands or wherever in the body, there'll be these memory cells. And the point is these memory cells are already sensitized to the particular COVID-19 SARS coronavirus type 2. So if the virus comes back into the body, these cells will be presented with the virus, and they'll say, just a minute, here's this virus again. And what these cells will do is they'll reproduce remarkably quickly, produce a whole clonal population of the B cells that actually produce the antibodies. These are called plasma cells. the B lymphocytes. It will produce untold billions of those in no time at all, and they will produce as much antibody as is required again. So even although the amount of antibody in the blood may drop, the immune system has got a good heads up, it's been warned, and it retains these memory cells that can rapidly respond to the infection again. So even if the antibodies in the blood drop, that doesn't mean to say the person will become vulnerable to the disease again. Because of the presence of these memory cells who remember how to combat the virus, and these memory cells that are able to rapidly divide into billions of cells that can produce the very specific antibody again, it means that people could probably enjoy long-term immunity. Now, we don't know how long-term that is at the moment, that's unknown, but they believe these memory cells exist, and these are senior biological scientists working for the Korean government and the Korea Centre for Disease Control, so they know what they're talking about. So the Korean Centre for Disease Control has not found a single case where a patient who tested positive for the virus after they've recovered, remember that's the false positive, has passed the coronavirus on to another person. So these 290 that expressed the virus were actually expressing dead virus, and not one of those people has infected anyone else. So they're not infectious anymore. Remarkably good news. So absolutely brilliant news on that front. I've got a few frequently asked questions, but I think I'll leave those to next time. That's such a profound study and quite a profound relief. So this is remarkably good news. So this Korean study is saying once someone's been infected, if they don't die, they will be immune. And the fears we've had about people getting reinfected were caused by false positives, the test detecting dead virus. And this is proved empirically because all of these people who tested positive, the test that turns out to have been detecting dead virus, not one of those people infected anyone else. Great news, really encouraging. That means herd immunity will develop. That means this virus should go away, and in a few years' time, I would hope this virus is just a historical artifact.